your pocket. Reading is important because it's a way for you to grow and learn about yourself, others, and the world. Mr. Tiffin's class has never had an author visit them before. Emmy Crane is a poet, said Mr. Tiffin. And she doesn't know it, said Robert. That rhymes. Not all poems rhyme, said Eleanor. Miss Crane is coming to visit for Poem in Your Pocket Day, said Mr. Tiffin. We're going to write poems of our own and put them in our pockets. I'm going to wear my jeans with 6 pockets that day, Eleanor whispered to Molly. I'm going to have a different poem in each one. I'm sure your poems will be perfect, Molly whispered back. Eleanor thought it would be too show-offy to agree, so she didn't say a word, but inside, she nodded. Eleanor got to work. All during March, she studied poetry. All during April, the class caught up with Eleanor. They read poetry books and learned poems by heart and wrote poems in their poetry journals. Every day there was something new to learn. Mr. Tiffin taught them about similes and tried them out. Robert is as tall as that really high building in the middle of town, said Robert. Math is like a knot, said Tara. One that we can untangle together, said Mr. Tiffin. Then they worked on metaphors. Reese's ice cream cone on a hot day, said Alex, even in April. Homework is a belt that is too tight, said Jake. Do you have a metaphor, Eleanor? Asked Mr. Tiffin. I'm coming up with something amazing, said Eleanor. I'm just not ready to say anything. Eleanor is a library, said Tara, filled with silence. The class read short poems. These are called haiku, said Eleanor. Little poems can say a lot, said Charlie. They read puzzle poems. These are called acrostics, said Eleanor. They're fun to figure out, said Jeremy. They read poems that look like pictures. These are called concrete poems, said Eleanor. A concrete pumpkin seed, said Kimmy. And they read a whole lot of funny poems. Hey, who knew poems could make you laugh, said Jake. I don't know the name for these, said Eleanor. Phew, said Molly. On a bright morning, Mr. Tiffin took the class outside. What do you see? He asked. Use your poet's eyes. Everyone looked around. Buds are like tiny red firecrackers, said Charlie, waiting to explode into flowers. Sadness is a cracked sidewalk, said Tara. Very nice, said Mr. Tiffin. Miss Crane will be so impressed. He noticed that Eleanor was being very quiet. How about you, Eleanor? What does your poet's eye see? Eleanor wanted Miss Crane to be impressed with her, too. I'm still thinking, she said. One Friday afternoon, Mr. Tiffin brought everyone in class a small brown bag with a surprise inside. Sneak a peek inside your bags and then write a poem about what's inside there. But don't tell anyone what you're writing about, he said. We'll do our best to guess. The class took out their poetry journals and got to work. Then they read their poems out loud. Alex guessed that Jake had a pebble in his bag, and she was right. Kimmy guessed that Molly had a glass animal, and she was right. She could even tell it was a horse. No one could guess what Eleanor had in her brown bag. Her journal page was clean and blank. This shell is too perfect to write about, she said. Try again at home tonight, said Mr. Tiffin, and remember, poetry is messy business. On Saturday night, Eleanor tried to finish her brown bag poem. She wrote 7 drafts, and she only liked 1. When she woke up in the morning, she read the poem she liked. This stinks, she said. On Sunday night, Eleanor wrote 6 haiku with a total of 3 metaphors and 2 similes. She smiled as she went to bed. In the morning, she looked them over. These are not poetry, she said. By Monday night, Eleanor was worried. She wrote 11 rhyming poems. The next morning, she threw them off her desk. Today is Poem in Your Pocket Day, she said, and I don't have anything that's good enough. Eleanor's eyes stung as she got ready for school. She wore a dress with just 1 small pocket, with nothing inside of it. The day was as gray as Eleanor's mood. The whole school was decorated for Poem in Your Pocket Day. There were pockets on the doors and poems in those pockets. There were pockets on lockers and poems stuffed in those. There were rolled up poems and stapled poems. There was poems written in chalk on the sidewalk, but that had been run in the rain. All the students had poems in their pockets, all except one. Eleanor worked on her poem at recess. She worked on her poem in the girls' room. She even worked on her poem during science, but the more she worked, the harder it was to think. At the end of the day, the students gathered in the gym for the poetry assembly. Mr. Tiffin told the school that Emmy Crane was a great American poet. He led her to the stage, and she sat down in the author's chair. "She looks like a queen," said Molly. "She looks perfect," said Eleanor. Emmy Crane read some of her poems aloud. She told the students what it was like to be a writer and answered their questions. "Do you make a lot of money?" asked Robert. "Just enough," said Emmy Crane. "Where do you get your ideas?" asked Charlie. "From everything I think and everything I feel," said Emmy Crane. At last, it was time for Mr. Tiffin's class to read their poems. Eleanor could hardly breathe as her classmates went up onto the stage and pulled their poems out of their pockets. Charlie recited his poem. Emmy Crane grinned. Robert shouted his poem. Emmy Crane winked. Tara whispered her poem. Emmy Crane nodded. Finally, it was Eleanor's turn. She looked at Mr. Tiffin. "Would you rather not read your poem?" he asked. Eleanor could not even speak. "I wanted my poem to be perfect," she said to Mr. Tiffin, "but I had nothing in my pocket, nothing at all." "You don't have to go up there," said Mr. Tiffin. "I can't disappoint Emmy Crane," said Eleanor. Eleanor walked slowly up to the stage. She looked out at all the students and the teacher and at Emmy Crane herself. "My name is Eleanor," she said in a tiny voice, "and I don't have a poem in my pocket. I tried and tried, but I couldn't get it right." "Come over here, Eleanor." Emmy Crane smiled a small smile as Eleanor walked closer. "No poem is perfect," she said, in a voice only Eleanor could hear. "I thought of so many things," Eleanor told Emmy Crane, "but they're all in my head." "Tell me what you've been thinking about," Eleanor said. Emmy Crane. Eleanor closed her eyes and thought about the poem she wanted to write. "I have a poem," she said, "in my pocket of mind." She remembered the poetry books she had studied in the library. "It is neat and perfect in there." She used her poet's eyes. As delicate as a shell and as sturdy, she thought about the treasure in a brown paper bag. It has mysteries hidden inside. Then she thought about her blank journal pages, but when I tried to write them down, the words disappear. She pictured the poem on the sidewalk that morning, like chalk on the sidewalk in the rain. Then she opened her eyes. At last, Emmy Crane spoke. "That is a poem itself," she said to Eleanor. "Those are words from the heart, and the words from the heart are where poetry begins." Eleanor stepped down from the stage. The assembly was over. Everyone clapped and cheered for Emmy Crane. Eleanor was feeling too much cheer, so she cheered inside as loud as she could. The end.